Then we come to the two economic keys, the short-term economic key, and these keys are very quantitative. They don't have to do with polls or vibe sessions or people's impressions or anything like that. They're very quantitative. These are the keys that have worked for 160 years. There is no recession in the election year. There has been no recession. A recession cannot take hold in less than 2 months. That's why my system confidently predicts that we will have a new and path-breaking president of the United States.
Hey guys, welcome to Capitalism. Today, I've got Allan Lichtman on the show. Allan is a historian and the creator of the Keys to the White House model that has been accurate 9 out of the last 10 elections. Lots of stuff to talk, Allan. But first and foremost, thank you for coming on Capitalism.
My pleasure, but let me make a small correction. I would say I was right 10 out of 10 when I picked Gore in 2000. As you know, the Supreme Court stopped the election with Bush ahead 537 votes. But as I proved in my report to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, that was the wrong verdict based on the intent of the voters. Gore should have won going away in Florida and the presidency. But we're not here to relitigate 2000, are we?
I mean, we could if you want to, but we have this election we can talk about. But be that as it may, a 10 out of 10, 9 out of 10, whatever the number. I mean, either of those two numbers are highly impressive.
Thank you.
Yeah, let's just dive right into it. For people who may be coming across you and your work for the first time, it's customary for me to kind of ask, like, what is your origin story? How did you get into researching this model? How did you develop this model? How did you come to this model?
Yeah, I'd love to tell you that I developed the keys to the White House by deep contemplation, by ruining my eyes in the archives. But if I were to tell you that, to quote the late, not so great Richard Nixon, that would be wrong. The keys, I came across them kind of serendipitously. In 1981, before you were born, I was a distinguished visiting scholar in Southern California. And there I met my friend, Vladimir Kailas Borak from Moscow, the world's leading authority in earthquake prediction. And it was his idea that we collaborate using the methods of earthquake prediction and my knowledge of American politics and history. So we became, in 1981, the odd couple of American political research. And to kind of make a breakthrough, we reconceptualized presidential elections, not as Carter versus Reagan. Remember, this is 81, liberal versus conservative, Republican versus Democrat, but in earthquake terms, as stability, the White House party holds power. Earthquake, the White House party is turned out of power. And with that in mind, we looked at every American presidential election, from the horse and buggy days of politics, the election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860 to the election of Reagan in 1980. And we used Kailas Borak's method of pattern recognition to see what patterns were associated over 120 years of enormous changes in our politics, in stability and earthquake. And that method led to the 13 keys to the White House, which were the best set of indicators to separate out earthquakes and stability. And the indicators were not random. They tapped into the structure of how American presidential elections really work as votes up or down on the strength and performance of the White House party. In other words, our big discovery was it's governance, not campaigning, that counts. And we also developed, as part of this pattern recognition analysis, a simple decision rule. If 6 or more of the keys are false, the White House party is a predicted loser. Otherwise, they are a predicted winner. I say false because all the keys are phrased, all 13 of them. So an answer of true favors the reelection of the White House party. An answer of false favors earthquake.
Understood. Well, let's just dive into this election.
Yes.
And so Kamala versus Trump. It's kind of a weird election, right? So you do have the White House party in this case. The person running on the same ticket as the White House party is not the incumbent, right? So,
Right. And the keys take that into account.
okay. So let's just go through each key and see where we lie. So, what is
Fair.
the first key in the model, and
Yeah.
what does it come out? Does it come out to a true or a false?
I'll go through each one and remember what we're looking for is will there be six falses or more?
Hmm.
So key one is mandate based on US House elections. Democrats lost seats, even though they did better than expected. Key one is false. I'm going to jump to key three, actually. I'll get back to key two in a moment. The incumbent candidate is the sitting president. As I said, the keys take into account the withdrawal of Biden. Obviously, that key is false. Next key, contest. Is there a major contest for the incumbent party nomination? I was very critical of the Democrats for openly trashing their sitting president right out in public. I've never seen that before. And I thought they were heading for disaster, not only pushing Biden out, but having a big party brawl. But the Democrats somehow grew a spine and a brain, united behind Harris. So the contest key, which could have been false and fatal, is true. Third party. I think here Harris had an impact as well because now voters didn't have to choose between two old white guys. Hate saying that being an old white guy myself, but it's true. The third party campaign of RFK Jr. fizzled. He suspended his campaign. That's true. So the first four, what I call the political keys, two falses. Then we come to the two economic keys, the short-term economic key, and these keys are very quantitative. They don't have to do with polls or vibe sessions or people's impressions or anything like that. They're very quantitative. These are the keys that have worked for 160 years. There is no recession in the election year. There has been no recession. A recession cannot take hold in less than 2 months. That key is true. Long-term economy, very quantitative. It asks whether real per capita growth during the current term is at least equal to the average of the previous two terms. And growth under Biden on that category has been virtually double. So that key is true as well. Next key is policy change. Clearly, there have been enormous policy changes between Trump and Biden. The revocation of Trump executive orders on the environment and immigration, the CHIPS bill, the infrastructure bill, a small gun control bill, the stimulus bill, the inflation and tax bill. Big changes. That key is true. Next key is another one I was watching carefully that I think Harris has had an impact as well, social unrest. To turn this key false, there has to be sustained, massive social unrest, like we saw in the 60s, sufficient to call into question the stability of the society. Well, I think having Harris out in front rather than Biden, who's been the target of protest, dampen protest, that key is true. We then come to my favorite key, the scandal key. Very juicy. But Republicans, I think, understand this key and have been trying for 4 years to pin a scandal on Joe Biden and have come up empty. Their so-called smoking gun witness, Mr. Smirnoff, turned out to be arrested by the FBI for lying about Biden and for spreading Russian propaganda. In fact, we see that lie repeated again by Donald Trump in the debate. And it doesn't matter that Hunter Biden is embroiled in scandal. The definition of the key, and you got to stick to the definitions, is that it has to implicate the president himself, and there has to be some bipartisan recognition of wrongdoing, as we saw with Mitt Romney, Liz Cheney, Adam Kinzinger, recognizing wrongdoing by Trump. And it can't be a family member. Hunter Biden does not turn the key any more than Jimmy Carter's reprobate brother, Billy Carter, turned the key. So we're still down to keys. We're getting to the end here, only four keys left. I want to jump to the last two keys before I get to the two foreign policy keys. These are the charisma keys. And I've been criticized, oh, who's to say what is charisma? Well, the key actually very specifically defines it and has identified previous candidates who fit the bill, and there are very few. To meet this key, a candidate has to be one of those once in a generational, broadly inspirational, transformational candidates like Franklin Roosevelt on the Democratic side and Ronald Reagan on the Republican side. Whatever you may think of Harris, she's not yet an FDR. So the incumbent charisma key is false. That's three keys down. Finally, the key has to do with a challenging charisma, and because they're always phrased, so a true answer favors the incumbent. This key reads, the challenging candidate is not one of these once in a generation, transformational, broadly appealing candidates. And Donald Trump's a great showman, but he doesn't meet the key because he appeals to a narrow base. In 4 years as president, his approval rating was 41%, right at the bottom historically of all presidents. He lost two elections in a row by a combined 10 million popular votes. That key is true. So I think you're getting the picture. We're down two keys with only the two foreign policy keys, foreign/military failure and success, left to turn. And I've split them, which I think is an accurate reflection of what's going on. I say that the failure key is false, that there was a failure in Gaza, which is a humanitarian disaster with no end in sight. I know we don't have boots on the ground there, but we're very heavily invested in the Middle East. That's four. Final key, foreign policy success, which I give to the administration because it was Biden and Biden alone who put together the coalition of the West that stopped Putin from conquering Ukraine and then threatening our NATO allies. His continuing support has kept Ukraine alive for 2.5 years, even enabled them to make an incursion into Russia. This will go down in history as an historic achievement. So that's only four keys down. Remember, it takes six keys to count out the incumbent. And even if somehow something incredible happened and the success key flipped, under the worst case, that's still five, one short of a predicted defeat. That's why my system confidently predicts that we will have a new and path-breaking president of the United States, that Kamala Harris will be the first female president, first woman president of the United States, cracking, if not shattering, the glass ceiling, and she'll become the first American president of mixed African and East Asian descent, kind of foreshadowing where America's heading anyway, towards a majority-minority society.
Hey guys, quick pause. I won't take too much of your time, but if you're looking to add into your gold and silver stack, please consider Miles Franklin. More specifically, email them, info@milesfranklin.com, and tell them that Capital Cosm sent you in the subject line to unlock special pricing that you won't find on the website. In the unlikely event that you don't like the prices, you could always not buy. There's no commitment necessary, but I do recommend Miles Franklin for a number of reasons. The customer support is top notch, the prices are great, and I know the people there. Great people all around. So with all that said, let's get back to the video. Thanks, guys. So when you applied this model throughout all of history, we did mention that the last 10 elections were accurately predicted. What about the elections before that? Does the model retain its accuracy to the entirety of American history?
That's a little too ambitious. I've only looked at the model and it's been accurate since 1860. Now, there always has to be a cutoff point. And I picked 1860 because that's the beginning of the modern Republican versus Democratic political system. And before that, early you had a different system. You didn't have the ticket system. You had electors voting twice and the second place finisher becoming vice president. So it's been accurate for 160 years, but not 200 plus years.
Well, that's good enough for a lot of us, I guess. But so is there anything that could change between now and election day that could turn any of these keys the other way?
The biggest myth of American politics is the October surprise. Somehow some big surprise is going to come up in October and change the outcome. Well, I've always predicted my election results before any October surprise and never changed them. I did not change my keys which predicted an Obama victory very early on when Obama got slaughtered, worse than Biden, in his first debate with Mitt Romney. When the polls turned against him, pundits were writing him off. The keys did not change. My prediction of Donald Trump in 2016 did not change when we had this unique situation of Donald Trump on tape bragging about grabbing women by their private parts. The keys are the Northern Star prediction. They do not lightly change. And by the way, you can imagine predicting Trump in 2016 did not make me very popular in 90% plus Washington, D.C. Democratic, where I teach at American University. It shows my predictions are totally nonpartisan. They don't reflect my own views, they reflect my science. I predicted the two most conservative presidents of our time, Reagan and Trump, and liberal presidents like Obama and now prospectively Harris.
So on the social cohesion key, I forget what the proper name you gave it.
Social unrest.
Social unrest, yes. What about the Free Palestine protests? Does that not a big enough movement to account for that?
It's not close. Remember the definition of the key. It has to be massive, sustained social unrest sufficient to call into question the stability of the society. We had sporadic protests for a while in the spring. Then we had a big fizzle of the so-called chaos that would be caused at the Democratic convention. This doesn't come close, for example, to the massive sustained social unrest of the late 1960s and early 1970s. Not a close call.
Yeah, and then when it comes to the charisma factor, this is I would assume that a lot of Trump fans would see him as charismatic, but you don't see it that way. Is that because he
No,
doesn't
it's
have
not how I see it. It's how the key
see it? Yes,
is
correct.
defined. And look, I get 10 emails a day from people who say they know how better to define these keys than I do. And my answer is go right ahead. Develop your own prediction system. I welcome, of course, none of them have a prediction system. None of them develop one. But if you're going to use my system, you have to stick with how the keys have been defined and how the keys have been answered since 1860. And a president with a 41% average approval rating who lost two elections by a combined 10 million votes is not one of those rare, across the board, broadly appealing candidates like Roosevelt and Reagan, who combined won 6 elections by landslides.
Right. So, are there any limitations that you see behind the model?
Of course, every model has its limitations. I'm not so arrogant to say the model will hold forever. It's a very robust model, goes all the way back to 1860, so it's got a lot of history behind it. But, I'm not psychic Gene Dixon with a crystal ball. I'm not Speaker Mike Johnson who thinks the Almighty talks to him. Patterns of history. Is it possible? Of course, that there could be some future unprecedented cataclysmic event that changes the course of history. But the problem is you can never know that in advance. You can only know it after it happens. That's why you can't willy-nilly keep adjusting your model every year.
Yeah. Aside, barring a black swan, is there anything else that you see could limit the model?
I think that's, the major limitation on the model. But, it requires certain things. And I'll tell you what it takes to be a successful forecaster. I've been doing it for 40 years. Got to say, every 4 years, I make half the country mad at me. And after doing it for 40 years, have the whole country mad at me. But here's the secret. You got to know math, although that ain't it. Got to know politics, although that ain't it. Got to know history, although that ain't it. The biggest thing you've got to do is keep your own personal views out of it. That may sound easy, but it's really hard. I trained for a long time as an historian to learn that. If I were predicting according to my personal views, I'd be wrong half the time, and I'd be useless as a forecaster. And I wouldn't be predicting Donald Trump on the one hand and Barack Obama on the other hand.
Could this model be applied at a smaller scale, say at like governor's races or like congressional races or things to that effect?
Great question. I tried that. And the problem is to get one set of keys to apply to 50 governor races or, you know, 30 some odd Senate races every 2 years or hundreds of House races. I've not been able to do it.
Right. And so, like, I mean, we just had a debate yesterday, and then we probably will have another debate. It appears to be the case, but from how you define the model, from how what the model says throughout history, these debates will not have any sort of impact on the eventual outcome.
I deliberately issued my prediction before the debate
Hmm.
because I wanted to drive home the big message of the keys. Polls have no message. They're just a bunch of numbers with big error margins around them, much bigger than statistical error of plus and minus 3%, because people lie, they haven't focused, they change their minds, no one's voted yet, so you got to guess who the actual voters are, meaningless stuff. But there is a big message to the keys, and that's the reason why I issued my prediction before the debate. And that is, it's governing, not campaigning, that counts. Hillary Clinton won all the debates and still lost. John Kerry won the debates against the bad debated George W. Bush in 2004 and still lost. You can't predict elections from debates or from any of the ephemeral events of the campaign that the media spends hundreds of millions of dollars focusing on. I understand that. The journalists are my buddies and they're real smart, but they're under a pressure I don't have. They have to cover the election every day. So they have to make believe as though it's a horse race with candidates sprinting ahead and falling behind, with the score being kept by the pollsters. Totally misleading way of looking at elections, but I can see why they're forced to do that. They can't just say, Lichtman predicts Harris, see you in a few months.
Right. And is this model U.S. specific? Could you apply this to other presidential races across the globe?
I'm asked that all the time. And my answer is you can't just export the keys and apply them to other countries. But the methodology that Kyla Sporak and I followed could be used by someone, not me, who knows the history and politics of other nations and is objective and not, or impartial, I would say, and not just replicating their political views.
And so, like, are there any other trends out there that you're currently looking at? I mean, you've created this great model. Is there anything else that you're kind of working on at the moment to kind of?
Yes, I have a new book coming out. It's called The Truth About Conservatives. It's Not What You Think. And it shows that Donald Trump is not an aberration, as so many claim when it comes to conservatism, but in fact is consistent with the history of 100 years of the American conservative movement. That'll be out next year. University of Notre Dame Press, a Catholic press, a great press, to put out that book.
So you're saying he's not an aberration. His ascent was predictable.
A
Right.
Trump type was predictable, not his particular personality quirks,
Right.
but what he represents. These, old fashioned conservatives like George Will or, Bill Kristol say, oh, he's not a true conservative. My book shows he is. Plus, how can you say he's not a true conservative when 90% of conservatives vote for him and virtually every conservative leader at every level in America supports him?
What past presidents parallel Trump the most?
Nixon, in his disregard for democracy, but not in his policies.
Anyone else?
Uh, Hoover, Harding, Coolidge, the very conservative presidents of the 1920s.
So all of these guys, Nixon, Coolidge, etc., their ascent was at a time where the conditions were all there for their type of conservatism to arise,
Correct.
similar to Trump.
Correct. And again, remember, it's governing, not campaigning, that counts. Trump won, not because of Trump, but because there were enough keys counted against the strength and performance of the Democratic Party. For example, not following up Obamacare with another big policy change, not following up the killing of bin Laden with another big splashy foreign policy achievement, the big battle between Sanders and Clinton, etc.
And so, what does that imply for American conservatism? That we're at this stage. What typically comes after?
I think, I'm presuming Trump's going to lose. Even if the Trump disappears from the scene, I don't see a big change in American conservatism or in the complexion of the Republican Party.
So, the complexion of the Republican Party as we've known it pre-Trump, or the one that exists now post-Trump?
My point is, Trump is consistent with 100 years of
Mm,
conservatism. Not every Republican is necessarily fits that mold, but typically they do. Plus, for a lot of our history, conservatism was divided between Republicans and conservative Southern Democrats. We forget the Dixiecrats. That only changed in the late 20th century when the Dixiecrats became Republicans.
I see. And what about on the Democratic side, or let's say liberal presidents? Are there these cycles that inhibit liberal presidents in the same way that it would inhibit a Trump or a Nixon?
Sure. Liberal presidents typically have needed big majorities in the House and the Senate. The two most successful liberal presidents, of course, were Franklin Roosevelt and Lyndon Johnson in terms of domestic policy, and they had overwhelming majorities. Obama was able to pass the Affordable Care Act by uniting every single Democrat. It was incredible. It was the social piece of legislation without a single opposition vote. It's hard now to adopt policies under divided government, and that's been that way for a long time. I
I see.
got to run.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Alan. Drop us where people can find you.
Yes, please check out my live show every Tuesday and Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time at Allan Lichtman YouTube. That's ALLANLICHTMAN YouTube. I do it with my son. It's a lot of fun. Also want to brag about one thing. I'm 77 years old. I just qualified in the 1500-meter run and the 800-meter run for the National Senior Olympics. And my wife,
Wow.
who's much younger, qualified in swimming. So we're both going to the Senior Olympics next year.
Congrats. Well, we'll be on
Not
the
just a
lookout for you
history
guys
nerd.
then and there.
Thank you. Take care.
Yep. Thanks for watching. Thanks for coming here, Alan. And guys, thanks for watching. Leave us a comment down below. Let me know what you guys think. If you agree or disagree. If you disagree, let us know why. Really interested to get your take. If you agree, type "Go Alan Go" in the comment section. Also, check out our Substack, capitalcosm.substack.com. And yeah, I'll catch you guys in the next episode. Bye, y'all.
Take care.